My name is Rachel. I'm 68 years old. Most people, if they noticed me at all, would say I'm well put together for my age. I don't know what that's supposed to mean, really. I still keep my hair short and tidy, the way I have for years, and I like clothes that last, fabrics that breathe, shoes I can walk in. It's just my way. There's a long mirror by the door, narrow, a bit warped at the top from when the movers dropped it, and sometimes I stop there out of habit before I go out. My face looks much the same to me as it always did, only softer at the edges, with eyes that have lost the sharpness of youth but seem to know more. I live alone now. My husband, David, passed away nearly 15 years ago. Some days it feels like a lifetime ago. Other times I wake up expecting to hear him humming in the kitchen, stirring his coffee. He always did that. Never music, just the steady sound of his own voice filling up the morning. It was the sort of thing you miss most once it's gone. Our apartment isn't large, but it's filled with things that remind me of who I was before the world got so fast. Photos of a little girl with dark curls and chubby knees, birthday cards, my mother's old sewing box, a battered copy of The Joy of Cooking with notes scribbled in the margins. There's a ceramic bowl Naomi made when she was 8, a sun with uneven rays sitting on the windowsill with my keys inside it. Naomi, my only child. When she was young, she used to crawl into my bed on stormy nights, knees drawn up, whispering her worries to me in the dark. She was always quick, clever, with an eye for detail, whether it was building Lego towers or organizing her crayons by color, or telling me exactly which shoes didn't go with which dress. I tried to let her grow into herself without too much interference. Sometimes I wonder if I leaned too far back, gave her too much room to become her own person. She certainly has. She's sharp, efficient, self-sufficient in a way I never managed to be. She got married last month. Or rather, she's in the middle of getting married. The planning started almost a year ago, and in some ways, it hasn't really ended. Naomi and Mark, her fiancé, run everything on Google Sheets, with checklists and codes and meetings at the coffee shop. The first time she showed me the seating chart, I laughed out loud. It looked like the diagram for an operating room. I'm not complaining. The truth is, I'm grateful she wants me there at all. I know too many women my age who have become invisible, whose children call out of duty, who aren't invited anywhere except birthdays and funerals. Naomi isn't like that. She remembers me on Thursdays, sends photos of her cat when he does something ridiculous, texts me from IKEA to ask about curtain rods. She's busy, but I don't begrudge her for it. I was busy too once. There are moments, though, when I feel the edges of my world shrinking, just a little, each year. Some friends have moved away, others have faded into the background, caught up in grandchildren or new routines. My days have a rhythm, but sometimes it's as if I'm playing a quiet accompaniment to everyone else's melody. I don't mind, not really. Still, I'd be lying if I said I didn't long for a bit more color, a reason to take out the good scarf or wear lipstick again. As the wedding drew near, I found myself thinking about my own mother more and more. She raised me with patience and a kind of stubbornness, never pushy, but quietly insistent that there was value in the small things, in making an effort, in showing up for life even if no one else was watching. She had a dress, navy blue, with tiny black beads sewn at the collar that she wore on special occasions. It wasn't fancy, but it made her stand straighter. After she died, I kept it tucked away, unable to let it go. Sometimes, late at night, I'd take it out, run my fingers over the seams, and wonder what it would feel like to wear it myself, to step out into the world not as someone's mother or wife, but as Rachel, a woman with her own history, her own quiet pride. But these are the sorts of thoughts that usually fade with the sunrise, replaced by grocery lists and news headlines and the comfort of routine. Still, as Naomi's wedding approached, I couldn't help but wonder, was it possible, just once, to be more than a background figure, to be seen, even if only for a moment, as someone with a story of her own? 2 weeks before Naomi's wedding, the weather was just shifting, late summer slipping toward fall. Mornings were cool, sunlight softer. I found myself making tea instead of coffee and noticing how quiet the apartment was, with just me and the birds outside. The city was humming with that particular restlessness that comes before a big family event. Everywhere, it seemed, people were preparing, ironing shirts, wrapping gifts, rehearsing speeches in their heads. Naomi called and asked if I could come by to look at some last-minute details. She had a new planner, a 3-ring binder fat with printouts and swatches, tool samples, color palettes, florist contacts. There were photos clipped from magazines of brides in silk and satin, grooms in navy suits, centerpieces that looked like wild meadows. I brought a casserole with me, her favorite, potato and leek. Naomi barely noticed, her mind spinning with tasks and logistics. "Just put it in the fridge, Mom? Thanks." I smiled, tucked it away, and sat at the table, watching her organize. Mark came in and gave me a little nod, polite but preoccupied. I tried to make conversation, but there was always something to check, someone to call, a timeline to update. Later, when the kitchen was quiet and Naomi finally took a breath, I found the courage to mention my idea. I had been thinking about it for days, circling around the memory like an old photograph. "There's something I'd like to show you," I said. She glanced up from her phone, half listening, one hand still typing a message. I walked to the hallway closet and took out a large, zippered bag. The dress was inside, navy, with a high neckline and careful beading, the fabric heavy and soft with age. I had kept it wrapped in tissue, thinking that maybe one day there would be an occasion worthy of it. "My mother wore this to my cousin Ruth's wedding in 1963, I said, unzipping the bag. "I was about 8. She stood out, even though she hated attention. I remember thinking how grown up she looked, how proud I was to be her daughter." I held the dress up, letting the light catch the beads. For a moment, I imagined stepping into it, brushing out my hair, adding a little lipstick. I saw myself at Naomi's wedding, standing quietly among the guests, not at the center, but still visible. I liked the idea of honoring my mother, of bringing a piece of our family history into the day. Naomi set her phone down and looked at the dress. Her eyebrows lifted, then pinched together in a way I'd come to recognize, a signal that she was about to say something that would sound casual, but would land somewhere deeper. "Mom," she started, drawing the word out with a little laugh. "You're not serious about wearing that, are you? I mean, it's kind of old-fashioned, don't you think?" She paused, her smile uncertain. Then she added, "You're not like Karen. She always knows what's in style. Look at you. You're, well, you're like an old postcard." She laughed, just a quick, bright sound, a little too loud for the room. And then silence. Mark was looking at his phone. Naomi picked up a pen and started jotting down a note. No one looked at me. The window was open, and I could hear someone mowing a lawn in the distance. I stood there, holding the dress, suddenly unsure of myself. It was just a small thing, I told myself. Just a moment. I forced a smile, the kind you wear when you don't want anyone to see what you're really feeling. "I'll find something else," I said quietly. I zipped the bag, slid it back into the closet, and sat down at the table. Naomi was already talking about something else, napkin rings or playlists. The moment disappeared, folded into the swirl of wedding details. I sat there for a long time, nodding, smiling, answering questions about weather and parking and guests. My mother's dress stayed in the closet, the beads catching a little bit of light through the crack in the door. That evening, as I left Naomi's apartment, the streets were glowing with the last of the sun. I carried my purse in one hand, keys in the other, and tried to shake the feeling of having been set aside, not rudely but gently, as if I were just another piece of the background, meant to blend in and not distract from the main event. When I got home, I hung my coat, made a cup of tea, and sat in the chair by the window. The city sounded far away, muffled by glass and distance. I thought about my mother, about her dress, about the way she always stood a little straighter when she wore it, even if no one noticed but me. I looked at my own reflection in the window, faint, ghostly in the dim light, and wondered when exactly I had started to fade. But I didn't cry. I just sat quietly, the dress still fresh in my mind, and listened to the slow tick of the clock. I didn't mention the dress again. The week before the wedding passed in a blur. Errands, phone calls, polite exchanges. Naomi sent me reminders and lists. I checked off each task, careful not to add trouble. I'd already bought a dress weeks before, just in case. Simple, with a soft, dove gray color Naomi had approved, and a cardigan to match, because the forecast said there might be rain. Sensible shoes, neutral lipstick. I told myself it didn't matter, that it was enough just to be present, not to stand out. The morning of the wedding, the city was washed clean by a night storm. The air was crisp, the kind that makes everything look sharper, brighter, almost as if the world is freshly laundered. I woke early, force of habit, and moved quietly through my routines. Shower, tea, a small breakfast. My nerves buzzed beneath the surface, not with excitement, but with something gentler, sadder. Not sadness for Naomi. For her, I felt only pride. She was stepping forward into a new life, arms wide open, head high. It was myself I was thinking of, my own place in the picture, unremarkable and just out of focus. At 9, the makeup artist arrived, young, brisk, full of energy. She brought an entire suitcase of powders, sprays, and brushes. She worked quickly, barely making eye contact, as if I were a mannequin. Her hands were gentle, her tone polite. "We'll keep it very natural," she said, almost to herself. "Just enough to look fresh on camera." I caught my reflection when she was done. A faint blush, mascara barely there, lips a pale rose. I nodded, thanked her, and tucked a stray hair behind my ear. The apartment filled with noise. Naomi's friends arrived, then Mark's family, then the photographer, always moving, clicking, arranging. There was laughter, stories, instructions, where to stand, when to smile. I moved from room to room, sometimes invisible, sometimes beckoned for a photo. I was thanked for my help, handed glasses of water, included in cheerful toasts and short conversations about the weather. Everything was friendly, pleasant, organized. The ceremony itself was beautiful, as everyone said it would be. The venue was an old library with high ceilings, flooded with light. Naomi walked down the aisle on Mark's arm, radiant in her dress of flowing ivory, flowers in her hair. There were readings, music, a quiet exchange of vows that made everyone dab at their eyes. I sat in the front row, smiling at the right moments, feeling tears prick my eyelids for reasons I couldn't quite explain. I watched Naomi laugh, her cheeks flushed with joy, her eyes shining with everything ahead of her. I looked at Mark's mother, Karen, in her pale blue suit, fashionable, slim, every hair in place. She gave a short, witty toast that made everyone laugh. I raised my glass and smiled. Nobody noticed that I didn't say much. After the ceremony, there were hours of photographs, family groupings, friends, children, couples. I stood where I was placed, smiled on cue, tried to keep my chin up and my eyes open. At one point, the photographer adjusted me gently. "Just a little to the left, Rachel. Yes, perfect. Chin down. Good." I realized I'd become part of the scenery, necessary, but unremarkable, a fixture in the frame. Dinner was lively, loud, full of music and clinking glasses. People drifted from table to table, and Naomi barely sat still, hugging guests, dancing with her friends, making sure everyone felt seen. When it was time for me to give my gift, I handed her a small, heavy envelope. Inside, I'd written a note, simple, heartfelt, telling her how proud her father and I were, how much joy she'd brought to our lives. I tucked in a photograph of her as a little girl, holding a dandelion, blowing wishes into the wind. Naomi hugged me, quickly, her eyes flicking past me to someone else. "Thanks, Mom. This is perfect," she said. "Don't go anywhere, okay?" But I could feel the celebration already moving on, sweeping forward like a current. I sat at my table and watched it go. By the time the party ended, my feet ached, and my face felt stretched from smiling. I said goodbye to relatives I hadn't seen in years, exchanged polite words with Mark's family, and waited for my taxi in the lobby. The city lights shimmered in the rain. I pressed my forehead to the glass, feeling the coolness against my skin. When I got home, the apartment was still, untouched. I hung my dress in the closet, still new, still approved, and washed my face slowly, letting the water run warm. The mirror above the sink fogged over. I wiped it clear and studied my reflection. For a moment, I tried to see myself as Naomi might have, a shadow in the background, comforting, safe, not remarkable. I sat in my old chair by the window, wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, and let the silence close in. It was a kind of clarity, sudden and sharp. I was comfortable, reliable, forgettable. The person people leaned on but rarely saw. Not the star, not even a named role, just part of the background, dim, no details. I didn't cry, though I wanted to. I sat for a long time, hands folded in my lap, listening to the city's hush. There was no anger, just a hollow certainty, a point of no return, quietly crossed, in the middle of my own living room. Something inside me, small, persistent, stirred. I realized I had grown so careful about not taking up space, not disrupting, not standing out, that I had faded almost entirely from my own story. I wondered when or if I'd ever step forward again, but I didn't move, not that night. I just sat there, listening to my own breath, the soft tick of the clock, and the faint, persistent ache of being invisible. The days after the wedding settled over me like a fine dust. I kept busy, as I always had. Grocery lists, a doctor's appointment, a slow walk through the park with a paperback in my bag that I barely opened. I answered a few calls, mostly from relatives returning home after the wedding, asking about the weather, their flights, whether I had enjoyed myself. I said all the right things. It was lovely. You know how Naomi is. She thinks of everything. Inside, I moved carefully through my routines, as if I could step lightly enough to avoid disturbing the strange, new silence I felt. My phone was quieter now, the flurry of wedding logistics gone. I watched TV in the evenings and cooked meals I barely tasted. I realized with a kind of surprise that I hadn't really cried. About the dress, about the moment in Naomi's living room, about how easy it was to be overlooked. The sadness was there, but it was quiet, polite, unwilling to cause a scene. One afternoon, the sky was low and gray, threatening rain. I opened the closet to put away a winter coat and saw the zippered bag with my mother's dress still there, undisturbed, pushed toward the back behind sensible cardigans and rain jackets. I stood for a moment with my hand on the bag, remembering the feeling of being 8 years old, watching my mother get ready in that same dress, how she would run a hand through her dark hair, put on a pair of earrings, and look at herself with a small, private smile. I closed my eyes and tried to summon that woman, the woman I used to be, or maybe just the one I hoped I could become. Before I got married, before I learned to make myself small for the comfort of others, I used to work in an atelier, a real one, with big windows, long tables scattered with scraps of silk, pins, measuring tapes. I used to draw patterns, cut fabric, imagine whole wardrobes for people I'd never meet. I loved the smell of chalk, the way new fabric felt under my hands. I'd leave with threads caught in my hair, proud of what I'd done. Marriage brought new routines, other joys, but slowly the sewing box was pushed further back into the closet. The dreams became smaller, more private, until they were just the things I remembered when the house was quiet and no one needed me. I stood in front of the closet for a long time, holding on to the memory. I was tired of being tired, tired of sitting politely in the background, waiting for permission to matter. The next day, over tea, I pulled out my old fabric box, hidden on a high shelf, behind blankets and holiday decorations. It was heavier than I remembered, still full of remnants I'd saved for someday. A patterned silk scarf, leftover navy velvet, beads, old sketches folded into neat squares. I set everything out on the kitchen table and let my hands wander through it all. A small, almost forgotten thrill bubbled up. Not joy, not yet, but a sense of possibility. Something that whispered, "There's more." That evening, I called Helen, an old friend from my atelier days. We hadn't spoken in years, but her number was still penciled inside the address book I keep by the phone. The first ring made me hesitate. What would I even say? But she picked up on the third, her voice instantly familiar, lively, warm, touched with laughter. "Rachel? My goodness, how long has it been?" We caught up in halting bursts, both of us surprised by how easily the years fell away. I told her about Naomi's wedding, the dress, how I'd let myself fade. Helen listened, then said, gently but without pity, "It's not too late to step forward, you know. You were always the bold one, Rachel." Her words stayed with me. That night, I searched through my things for a piece of myself I thought I'd lost. An old notebook of design ideas, half finished, filled with little sketches and notes in the margins. I looked at them, fingers tracing faded pencil lines. My heart beat a little faster. I realized I wanted to see myself differently, not as a relic or a supporting character, but as someone who still had stories left to tell. In the morning, I made an appointment at the salon. It felt almost reckless to call, but I did. "A cut and color," I told the receptionist, voice steady. "Not too modern, just something that feels like me." I set the date for Friday. It was only Wednesday, but the decision already made the days feel sharper, more awake. On Thursday, I called the hairdresser, a woman named Sophia I'd seen in the neighborhood for years, but never visited. She laughed when I introduced myself. "Finally! I see you walking past all the time. Come in, let's see what we can do." The old fabric from the box, navy velvet, deep green silk, sat on the arm of my sofa, waiting. I thumbed through them, thinking of what they might become. A scarf, a jacket, a dress that was neither trendy nor outdated, but unmistakably mine. Friday morning, the sun was out. I took the bus downtown, feeling strangely exposed, as if everyone could see the shift inside me. The salon was bright, clean, smelling faintly of lavender and dye. Sophia greeted me with a hug. She listened, nodding as I explained what I wanted. Something not young, not loud, but confident, alive. She washed and cut my hair, shaping it with careful hands, snipping away the frayed edges. "There you are," she said when she finished. "Welcome back." I looked in the mirror and saw not a new woman, but a woman I recognized, someone who'd stepped forward, however quietly. Afterward, I went home, spread the fabric out in the afternoon light, and called Helen again. "Do you still have your sewing machine?" I asked. She laughed. Of course, come by next week. We'll make something new out of all that old beauty. I hung up and sat by the window, breathing in the sun. For the first time in a long while, I felt not backgrounded but present, in my own skin, in my own space, with a future that didn't ask anyone's approval. The week that followed felt like a quiet awakening. I moved through my routines, but everything seemed slightly altered, sharper, more present. I noticed things I'd stopped noticing: the way light caught the cracks in my kitchen tiles, the birds that nested under the eaves, the hum of traffic in the distance. When I looked in the mirror, the change in my hair was subtle but undeniable. Softer at the edges, a bit more shape, a bit more Rachel. On Tuesday, I gathered the fabrics and sketches and walked to Helen's apartment. She lived in a building not far from mine, but the walk felt different, as if I were headed somewhere meaningful and not just filling time. Helen's place was warm and a little cluttered, with stacks of fabric, buttons in jars, paper patterns pinned to the walls. She hugged me tightly, and it wasn't until then that I realized how long it had been since someone held me just because they wanted to. We settled in, the old sewing machine set up by the window. Helen poured tea, and we talked about life, about her grandchildren, about the things we'd set aside. I spread out the navy velvet and the green silk. I want something classic, I said, but not invisible. Something with presence, not volume. We worked slowly, sketching, cutting, pinning pieces to the dress form. I felt the old rhythms returning, the tug of thread, the gentle whir of the machine. My hands, uncertain at first, grew confident again. Helen encouraged me, made suggestions, listened to my stories. We laughed about the past, about disastrous blouses and botched hems, and grew quiet when we hit a snag, both absorbed in the work. By Thursday, the dress was nearly finished, a long, elegant line, navy velvet with green silk at the collar and cuffs, beading added by hand, one detail at a time. It felt new, but also like coming home to myself. Helen insisted I try it on. When I looked in her long mirror, I felt a strange rush of pride. The dress was simple, but it fit me, truly fit me, in a way nothing had in years. Helen took my picture. "You should show people this," she said. "You look like you've just stepped out of a story." I laughed and dismissed it, but the words stayed with me. That Friday, I walked through the city with a new kind of confidence. I stopped at a small cafe for coffee and sat near the window, watching people rush by. I didn't feel young or suddenly glamorous. I felt grounded, rooted in myself, visible in a way that didn't require anyone's permission. That evening, I attended a fundraiser at the downtown community center, a gathering to support the local library, hosted by a friend of Helen's. I'd been invited before but always declined, not wanting to take up space. This time, I wanted to go. I put on my new dress, pinned on my mother's old brooch, and stepped out into the soft dusk. The community center was bustling, people greeting each other, music playing low, tables set with candles and flowers. I felt a moment's hesitation at the door, then squared my shoulders and walked in. Heads turned, but not in a way that made me shrink. I saw old neighbors, former colleagues, even a few of Naomi's childhood friends now grown and hosting tables of their own. I wandered among the displays, silent auction items, stacks of books, posters with plans for the library's renovation. Helen waved me over and introduced me to her friends as the most talented dressmaker she's ever known. I blushed, protested, but smiled. People asked about my dress. Some wanted to know if I'd made it myself. "With a little help from Helen," I said. They admired the fabric, the beading, the color against my skin. Halfway through the evening, as I stood at the refreshments table sipping lemonade, a young woman with a camera approached. "Excuse me, could I take your photograph?" she asked. You have such presence. There's a theme tonight. Legends of the neighborhood. You fit. I almost said no, but Helen nudged me forward. The flash went off. The woman smiled and took my name. Just for the caption, she said. Later, as the evening wound down, I found myself talking with people about the old atelier, about sewing, about city history, and the library's future. For the first time in years, I felt part of the current, not drifting on the edge, but held in place by my own gravity. I could see the admiration, the curiosity, even a little envy in the eyes of those around me. It was new but not uncomfortable. When I left, I walked home slowly through streets lit with lamplight and the last blush of sunset. My feet ached a little, but I was buoyed by something lighter than pride, perhaps relief, or the simple satisfaction of being seen. The next morning, Helen called. "You made the magazine," she said, excitement in her voice. She texted me a photo. There I was, standing at the fundraiser in my dress, looking straight at the camera, smiling not just with my lips, but with my eyes. Underneath, the caption read, "The Legend of the Evening, Mrs. Rachel K." I sat with that for a long while, my tea growing cold, the city waking outside my window. I thought of my mother's dress, my own hands, all the years I'd tried to blend in. And now, without fuss or fanfare, I'd managed something I thought was lost to me. I'd stepped forward, not just as someone's mother or wife or friend, but as Rachel, whole and visible, at last. I didn't rush out to buy the magazine. It found me. On Sunday morning, Helen stopped by with a copy tucked under her arm and a box of pastries. She waved the glossy pages in the air as she entered, half teasing, half proud. I made us tea and we sat together at the kitchen table, turning through the pages until we found it. A small spread about the fundraiser with a few bright photographs, children painting, an old librarian with her medals, and, tucked near the end, me. The photo was clearer than the one on Helen's phone. I was standing by a table with books stacked in uneven towers, the soft glow of candles lighting the lines of my dress and catching the green at my collar. My posture was relaxed, hands folded lightly, a quiet smile. The caption, "The Legend of the Evening, Mrs. Rachel K," seemed almost absurd, but seeing it in print, I couldn't help but grin. Helen made a fuss, but it was a gentle one. "See? See? I told you. That's the Rachel I remember." She was right. Looking at that photograph, I didn't see the outline of a background figure. I saw a woman with history, with a presence shaped not by what she'd lost, but by what she'd chosen to carry forward. We talked about little things, her grandchildren, a movie she'd seen, a new knitting pattern she wanted to try. She left before noon, and the apartment settled back into its gentle rhythm. I propped the magazine on my bookshelf, not quite hidden, not on display, just where I could find it again if I wanted to. I didn't expect any great reaction. I didn't post about it. I didn't mention it to anyone outside of Helen's circle. But the city is smaller than it seems. Word finds its way around corners you didn't know existed. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from Naomi. It was short, just a photograph of the magazine page, my picture circled in bright pink. Underneath, she wrote, "Where did you get all that?" There was a hesitation in her words. Not angry, not exactly proud, more like curiosity mixed with surprise, maybe even a little defensiveness. I could picture her, sitting with Mark in their sunlit kitchen, holding the magazine between her fingers, brows knit together as she tried to fit this image into the story she'd built about her mother. "Where did you get all that?" I set the phone down for a moment. In the hush of my living room, with the late sunlight creeping across the floor, I thought about how easy it is to become invisible to the people you love, how much of myself I had tucked away, deliberately sometimes, and sometimes just by habit, until it seemed I had no edges left, only the soft comfort of being someone else's support. I typed back slowly, choosing each word with care. In myself. You just haven't looked in there in a while. I watched the little dots flicker on the screen as she typed. Then they disappeared. Nothing more arrived. The silence that followed was not quite cold, but heavy, a kind of waiting, a pause where an answer might have fit. I put the phone down and stood at the window, watching the street below. Naomi did not write again that day, or the next. In the past, this would have made me anxious. I would have second-guessed myself, worried that I'd spoken too sharply or not kindly enough. But something in me had shifted. The Rachel in that magazine photo, standing tall, eyes clear, at home in her own story, was not waiting for approval. I let the quiet come and didn't rush to fill it. The following days unfolded quietly, but with a new sense of freedom. At the library, people smiled at me a little longer. A woman at the bakery pointed at the magazine and asked if it was really me. "It's a beautiful dress," she said. "Did you make it yourself?" I nodded, and for the first time in years, I let myself accept the compliment without shrinking from it. I spent time at Helen's, making small things, scarves, a bag, a pillow cover from a remnant of old floral fabric. She encouraged me to enter a local crafts fair. I said I'd think about it. At home, I sat by the window in the late afternoons, reading, sewing, watching the changing light, feeling a little more solid, a little more real with each passing day. As for Naomi, she kept her distance. The next message was a practical one, about insurance forms. We made polite arrangements to meet for coffee the following month. I didn't push, didn't press. I realized, maybe for the first time, that her silence was not my responsibility to fix. She would come around, or she wouldn't. But I could not let her idea of me set the limits of my world anymore. That magazine, that evening at the fundraiser, had shown me something simple but vital. You can become new to yourself at any age. All it takes is a step forward, one that no one else has to understand or even witness except you. The season began to turn. Days shortened imperceptibly at first until I noticed myself switching on the lamp earlier each evening. The air grew crisper and the leaves along my street moved from green to gold to a muted paper brown. Every morning I'd pause by the window with my tea, the city just stirring, and marvel at how different everything looked in this new light. Even the familiar buildings, even the worn bricks of my own block. Something inside me had shifted, quietly but unmistakably. There was no sudden rush, no great fanfare, only a steady certainty, built day after day, that I no longer needed to ask permission to take up space. I kept sewing with Helen. Sometimes we made practical things, aprons, tote bags, little pouches for her grandkids' colored pencils. Other times, we simply worked side by side, talking or not talking, each lost in the rhythm of fabric and thread. We tried new patterns, experimented with old ones. A few neighbors brought in clothes for mending, and I realized how much I enjoyed the gentle challenge of restoring what others thought was worn out or finished. Helen kept teasing me about the crafts fair, and after a while, I stopped saying maybe and said yes. We sent in our entry together. On days when I walked through the city, past the park, the cafe, the library, I noticed people looked at me differently. It wasn't about the magazine. It was something subtler, a shift in how I carried myself, a willingness to meet the world's gaze without apology or hesitation. I began to dress for myself, sometimes bold colors, sometimes my old favorites, always with care. I'd pin my mother's brooch on a scarf or wear the navy dress I'd made with Helen. Each morning, I took a moment in front of the mirror, not to erase my lines or hide my age, but to acknowledge them as marks of my presence, proof that I had lived and changed and chosen again and again to show up. Naomi and I kept our distance, at least for a while. Our next meeting, weeks after the magazine photo, was careful at first. We sat across from each other in a bustling cafe, she with her coffee, me with my tea. She was busy, as always, and her phone buzzed beside her plate. I could see her trying to study me, her eyes lingering a moment longer than before, as if looking for something she'd missed. Our conversation was polite: work, weather, Mark's new project. She asked if I was still sewing, and I said yes, that Helen and I were entering the fair. There was a flicker of something, pride or confusion. I couldn't say. I didn't fill the silence, didn't explain myself, didn't try to be smaller to ease the tension. I simply let the moment sit, trusting it to settle on its own. When we parted, she hugged me, not quickly, not out of duty, but with a gentleness that felt deliberate. She didn't mention the dress or the magazine. She didn't have to. Something between us had changed, not broken, but grown into a new, quieter shape. One where she might not know all my stories, but might, in time, want to hear them. At home, I kept the magazine on my shelf, but I no longer needed to look at it for reassurance. I had stopped waiting for someone else to define my worth. I began to seek out small joys for their own sake: a morning walk in the park, baking a loaf of bread just for the pleasure of kneading the dough, picking up an old novel and reading it through, undistracted. I wrote letters to friends I'd lost touch with. I painted my kitchen a pale yellow, just because I wanted to see sunlight even on cloudy days. Sometimes I caught myself, out of habit, drifting to the background, letting others' needs fill my days. But the difference now was that I noticed, and I chose. There was a freedom in that, in saying no when I wanted, in saying yes to myself when the mood struck. On the evening of the crafts fair, Helen and I set up our tables side by side. The hall was alive with laughter and the shuffling of feet, the hum of dozens of makers sharing their work. People stopped at our table, touched the fabrics, admired the careful stitches, asked about patterns and stories. I saw the same curiosity in their eyes that I'd seen in the fundraiser photograph. Not just about the things I'd made, but about the woman who had made them. I told stories about the atelier, about my mother's dress, about Helen's and my quiet afternoon sewing side by side. I didn't feel like a legend. I felt like myself, visible, present, content. Late that night, as I walked home with my arms full of unsold scarves and orders for new ones, I thought about all the years I had spent waiting in the wings, content to be scenery. I realized that stepping forward hadn't meant demanding the spotlight. It was something simpler. It was a kind of kindness to myself, a willingness to be seen, not just by others, but by the one person whose gaze mattered most: my own. Now, when I walk into a room, any room, I don't look for permission to be there. I don't apologize for my presence. I carry with me the quiet certainty of someone who has built a life out of ordinary moments and survived the years that made her fade. I am not just the background. I am Rachel. I am here. And that, I have discovered, is more than enough.